The vast Arizona sky stretched endlessly above the lazy Ranch, a dome of brilliant
Come
blue
on,
that
let's
seemed
get
to
you
swallow
settled.
the world whole. Beneath it, Elias Blackwood worked from sunup to sundown, a solitary figure against the immense and dusty land. The ranch was a good one, with strong fences and healthy cattle, but the silence in the homestead at the end of each day was a heavy weight. It was the silence of an empty table and a quiet hearth, a loneliness that echoed louder than any noise. He was a practical man, not given to daydreams, but he knew he could not build a future entirely on his own. He needed a partner, someone with a steady hand and a strong spirit to share the endless work and the quiet rewards. And so, with determined hope, he placed an advertisement in a newspaper back east, seeking a wife who understood the value of hard work and honest living, a world away. In a city where buildings crowded out the sky and the air was thick with coal smoke, Cora felt a different kind of loneliness. It was a sharp, aching emptiness left by her father's passing. He had been her entire family, and now he was gone. The small life they had built together vanished with him, leaving behind only a handful of debts and a future that felt as narrow and dark as the alleyways outside her window. One rain-swept afternoon, while searching for any opportunity to start over, her eyes found an advertisement tucked between notices for farm equipment and men seeking work. It was from a rancher in the Arizona Territory named Elias Blackwood. His words were plain and direct, asking not for romance, but for partnership. They felt like a lifeline, a chance to escape the gloom and build something new on her own terms. Their correspondence began, letters traveling slowly across the vast continent. Elias wrote of the demanding rhythms of ranch life, of cattle and crops, and the fierce beauty of the desert. Cora wrote back with equal practicality, listing her skills in baking, gardening, and mending. She presented herself as the capable, resilient woman she believed he needed, carefully hiding the deep well of grief that still lingered inside her. An agreement was made. She would travel west to become his wife. With a heart tangled in sorrow for the past and fear for the future, Cora sold the last of her possessions to buy a train ticket. She boarded the westbound train, leaving the damp city behind, clutching her one carpetbag and a quiet resolve to be as strong as her letters promised. The train shuddered to a final, hissing halt in Silver Creek, Arizona. Cora stepped down onto the wooden platform, the desert heat striking her like a physical blow. It was a dry, immense heat, so different from the damp chill she had left behind. She squinted against the blinding sun, taking in the small, weathered buildings and the vast, empty landscape that stretched to distant, purple mountains. The sheer scale of it made her feel tiny and insignificant. Her journey had been long and dusty, filled with the constant rumble of wheels on tracks, a sound that had seeped into her bones. But it was the silence in her heart that was the loudest. The further she traveled from her father's grave, the heavier her grief felt. A sharp, lonely pain she had no right to bring to this practical arrangement. Then she saw him. A tall man stood waiting, his posture straight and patient. He wore a well-worn hat shadowing his face and clothes dusted with the earth of this place. This was Elias Blackwood. He was not just words on a page anymore. He was real. The reality of it, the finality of her decision, crashed down upon her all at once. The courage she had carefully woven into her letters completely unraveled. A sob, harsh and unexpected, escaped her lips. She tried to stifle it, turning her face away, but the tears came anyway, streaming down her cheeks, cutting clean paths through the fine layer of travel grime. She was humiliated. This was not the composed, capable woman he was expecting. She was a mess of tears and exhaustion. Elias approached her. His steps were slow and deliberate on the sun-baked planks. Cora braced herself for his disappointment, for the anger of a man who had been promised a partner and received a weeping stranger instead. She wiped frantically at her face with her sleeve, struggling to find her voice. "Mr. Blackwood, I am so sorry," she managed to choke out, her voice trembling. "The journey was so very long. I am just tired, that is all. I am ready to see the ranch." It was a weak and transparent lie, and she knew it. He stopped in front of her, his presence solid and calm. He did not sigh in frustration. He did not cross his arms. He simply looked at her, truly looked, and saw the raw pain she could not hide. When he spoke, his voice was a low, gentle rumble, like distant thunder that promised not a storm, but rain for parched land. "You don't have to pretend with me." Those simple words held no judgment, only a quiet offering of understanding. He did not press for an explanation. He simply reached out and took her worn carpetbag from her shaking hand. Then he offered her his arm, a gesture of old-fashioned courtesy that felt like an anchor in her swirling sea of emotion. Mutely, Cora took it, and he led her away from the platform, away from the curious eyes of the town, and toward an unknown future that suddenly felt a little less terrifying. The wagon ride to the Lazy Bee Ranch unfolded in a silence that was not entirely uncomfortable. Elias did not press her with questions, for which Cora was profoundly grateful. The vastness of the land was overwhelming. Rolling hills of dusty green scrub stretched out under the enormous sky, and the air smelled of sun-baked earth and something sweet, like sage. It was so different from the crumbed, sooty streets of her past, and the sheer openness of it made her feel both small and strangely free. Elias pointed out landmarks in his quiet way. A distant mesa, a dry riverbed that would run with water after a rain, the beginning of his own land marked by a simple post and wire fence. His voice was calm, a steady sound that grounded her in this new reality. When the ranch house came into view, Cora's first impression was of steadfastness, not grandeur. It was a low, solid structure built of timber and stone, with a wide porch that looked out over the land. It looked like it had grown from the earth itself, weathering countless suns and storms. A few outbuildings, a large barn, and a corral stood nearby. Everything was tidy and well cared for, but it was unmistakably a place of work, not show. Elias helped her down from the wagon and led her inside. The main room was simple, with a stone fireplace, a sturdy table, and a few handmade chairs. It was clean, but it held the lonely silence of a space long occupied by only one person. "This is it," he said, his voice echoing slightly in the quiet room. "It is not much, but it is sturdy." Elias showed her to a small room at the back of the house. It held a narrow bed with a quilt, a simple washstand, and a window that looked out toward the barn. "This will be your room," he told her, setting her carpet bag down just inside the door. "For as long as you need it to be. There is no rush for anything else, Cora. You are safe here." The kindness in that statement, the granting of her own space and time, was a balm to her nerves. He was not demanding the wife he had corresponded with. He was offering shelter to the woman who had arrived. Later, as the immense orange sun began to sink below the horizon, painting the sky in breathtaking shades of violet and gold, they sat at the wooden table with a simple meal of stew and bread. The silence stretched again, but this time it felt like it needed to be filled. Elias looked at her, his gaze kind and patient. "You do not have to tell me," he began slowly, "but if you have a burden, sharing it can sometimes make it lighter to carry. I am a good listener." And so, under the soft glow of a single lamp, Cora began to speak. The words started haltingly, then came in a quiet rush. She told him of her father, not just his illness and passing, but the man he had been, his laugh, his kindness. She spoke of the crushing loneliness that followed, the cold fear of the debts she discovered, the desperate choice to answer an advertisement as her only way out. She confessed that she felt she had dishonored his memory by leaving so quickly, that she had arrived on his doorstep as a broken impostor, not the strong partner he had been promised. She did not cry this time, but the sorrow was plain in her voice. When she finished, Elias was silent for a long moment, looking into the fire. Then he shared his own story. He spoke of losing his own parents to illness when he was young, of having to build this ranch and this life from almost nothing, entirely on his own. He spoke of the years of silence in this house, of the difference between being alone and being lonely. "I know something of grief," he said, his voice low. "It does not follow a schedule. It will have its time, and you must give it that. There is no shame in it here." The next few days fell into a gentle, undemanding rhythm. Elias began to show her the workings of the ranch, not as chores she must immediately master, but simply as the life he lived. He showed her the chicken coop where she could gather warm, brown eggs each morning. He introduced her to the horses, teaching her their names and their personalities, letting her offer them an apple from her palm. He walked with her through the kitchen garden, pointing out the plants that were thriving and those that needed more care. Cora began to tentatively help, finding a strange peace in the simple physical tasks. She learned to knead dough for bread, the repetitive motion calming her restless thoughts. She sat on the porch in the evenings and mended a tear in his shirt, her hands slowly remembering their skill. They began to talk more easily, not just about grief, but about small things. She asked him about the names of the desert plants, and he told her. He asked about her life in the city, and she shared small, happy memories of her father. A quiet friendship began to grow in the space between them, built on shared honesty and a mutual respect for the other's past. The ranch house began to feel different. The silence was no longer empty, but often comfortable. The scent of baking bread began to mix with the smell of leather and earth. Cora still felt the ache of her loss, a hollow space inside her. But around that hollow space, something new was very slowly beginning to grow. She was starting to feel, for the first time since she had stepped off the train, that she might not just be safe here. She might eventually be able to heal. The rhythm of life on the Lazy Ranch became the anchor Cora desperately needed. Each morning, she woke to the gentle grey light before dawn and the distant sound of Elias already moving in the barn. The first few times, she had rushed to join him, fearing she was not doing enough. He had simply shaken his head. "The sun will rise whether we are there to see it or not," he had said, his tone not unkind. The work would be there after breakfast, so she had learned to start her own day in the quiet kitchen, building up the fire in the stove and measuring out flour for biscuits, finding a deep satisfaction in the simple, predictable chemistry of baking. Their days developed a pattern as steady as the seasons. After their morning meal, they would work side by side. Elias taught her the ways of the land, his low, patient voice a constant guide. He showed her how to check the fences for breaks, not just with a glance, but by testing the tension of the wire with a firm hand. He taught her how to call the cattle, a long, low sound that carried across the pastures, and how to identify which ones were content and which might be ailing. Cora proved to be a quick and willing student. Her hands, once used to fine needlework in a dim city apartment, grew strong and capable. Though now they were often marked with small nicks and calluses she wore with quiet pride. In return, Cora brought a new order to the homestead. She organized the kitchen, finding jars for the dried goods and setting up a system for the eggs and the milk from the single cow Elias kept. She took over the small kitchen garden, weeding the rows of beans and tomatoes with a careful hand, remembering the lessons her father had taught her about plants in their tiny city window box. The ranch began to change in subtle ways. Meals were no longer just fuel, but something to be shared. The table was set properly. There was always a fresh loaf of bread cooling on the sideboard, and sometimes, if she had time, a pie made from the campeches Elias had stored in the cellar. Their evenings were the quietest and most precious time. After the supper dishes were cleared, they would often sit on the white porch, watching the spectacular sunset paint the sky. The silence between them was no longer something to be filled, but a comfortable space to simply be. They began to share more stories, not just of their sorrows, but of their smaller hopes and past joys. Elias told her about the first calf he had ever delivered on his own, and the pride he had felt. Cora shared memories of the small celebrations she and her father would have, even when times were hard. They were building a history together, thread by thread. One afternoon, while Elias was mending a saddle in the barn, a sudden summer squall blew in. The wind howled around the house, and rain lashed against the windows. Cora, remembering the leak she had spotted in the pantry roof, rushed outside with a bucket, her shawl pulled tight around her. She found Elias already there, hauling a ladder into place. Without a word, she steadied the ladder's base as he climbed up into the driving rain to quickly tack a piece of oilcloth over the weak spot. They worked together seamlessly, a team against the elements. When they stumbled back into the warm, dry kitchen, soaked and breathless, they looked at each other and laughed, a real, genuine sound of shared accomplishment. In that moment, something shifted. They were no longer just Elias and Cora, the rancher and the mail-order bride. They were partners. They were a unit. The foundation of their practical arrangement had, without either of them quite noticing, been built upon something far stronger and more enduring. The house was no longer just a building. It was a home they were making together. The season turned, and the fierce heat of summer began to mellow into the golden light of early autumn. The rhythm of their days felt as natural as breathing to Cora now. She could saddle her horse, Daisy, with ease and ride out to check the far pasture alongside Elias. She knew which hen was the best layer and which one was prone to mischief. The hollow ache of her grief, while still a part of her, was now surrounded by a life that felt full and purposeful. She found herself humming as she worked, a soft, contented sound that seemed to belong to the very walls of the house. Elias, too, had changed. The lines on his face seemed etched from smiles more than squints into the sun, and the quietness that clung to him felt peaceful rather than lonely. The change in the weather, however, brought its own dangers. One evening, The sky, which had been a clear, brilliant blue all day, began to bruise with thick, purplish clouds rolling in from the west. The air grew still and heavy, a tense silence that made the horses in the corral restless and skittish. Elias stood on the porch, his gaze fixed on the approaching darkness. "This is a mean one," he said, his voice low with concern. "It has the feel of a real gully washer." He spent the next hour securing tools and making sure the barn doors were fastened tight. Cora helped without needing to be asked, her own nerves humming with the electric tension in the air. The storm hit with a sudden, violent fury just after nightfall. Thunder cracked like a cannon shot, shaking the very foundations of the house. Rain did not fall. It was hurled in great sheets against the windows, and the wind screamed around the corners of the homestead. They sat in the main room, the lamp flickering, listening to the awesome and terrifying power of nature. It was during a brief lull in the wind that they heard it, a sound that turned Elias's blood cold. It was not thunder. It was the distinct, splintering crack of wood giving way, followed by the panicked bawling of cattle. Elias was on his feet in an instant, grabbing his oilskin coat. "The fence is down on the north line, by the canyon rim," he shouted over the howl of the wind. "If the herd spooks and bolts that way, they will go right over the edge." The danger was immediate and grave. The loss of even a few head of cattle would be a serious financial blow. But the thought of the animals plunging to their deaths was a horror that filled him with dread. Before he could even tell her to stay inside, to stay safe, Cora was already pulling on her own coat, her face set with a determined calm. "I am coming with you," she stated, her voice firm and leaving no room for argument. He saw not a trace of the frightened woman from the train platform in her eyes, only a fierce and steady resolve. There was no time to discuss it. He simply nodded, a look of profound respect passing between them. The world outside was a nightmare of wind, driving rain, and slippery mud. They fought their way to the barn, the storm trying to tear them from their feet. They saddled the two strongest horses, trusting them to navigate the treacherous ground. Riding out into the storm was like riding into a black wall of water. Lightning flashes provided the only glimpses of the path ahead, illuminating the terrified herd of cattle milling in confusion, drifting dangerously close to the broken fence and the sheer drop of the canyon beyond. They worked together, their movements coordinated from months of partnership. Elias took the lead, his voice a steady, commanding roar as he tried to turn the led cows away from the danger. Cora, without hesitation, moved to flank the herd, using her horse to block their sideways movement, pushing them back toward the relative safety of the open pasture. The rain blinded them, the mud sucked the horses' hooves, and the terrified cattle were a powerful, unpredictable force. At one point, a young steer broke from the group and charged directly toward the broken section of fence. Cora, acting on pure instinct, spurred her horse forward, cutting off its escape and turning it back toward the group with a sharp cry. It felt like hours they fought the storm and the fear of the animals, but finally, slowly, they managed to turn the entire herd and drive them to a lower, sheltered area far from the canyon's edge. The danger had passed. Soaked to the skin, shivering, with cold and exhaustion, their horses breathing in great, heaving gasps, they looked at each other. The storm was still raging around them, but they had won. In that moment, standing in the pouring rain, they were not a man and a woman who had made a practical agreement. They were two parts of a whole, a team that had faced a crisis and prevailed. Elias reached out, his hand finding hers in the darkness, and squeezed it tightly. No words were needed. Everything had changed. The days that followed the great storm were quieter, filled with the necessary work of repairing the broken fence and tending to the shaken animals. But a new and different kind of energy hummed in the air between Cora and Elias. The shared danger, the way they had moved as one mind against the chaos, had stripped away the last remnants of their formal agreement. When their hands brushed while passing a tool, the touch sent a jolt through them both. When they shared a look across the dinner table, the air felt warm and charged with things left unsaid. The comfortable friendship they had built now felt like the foundation for something much deeper, something that made Cora's heart beat faster and Elias struggled to find his normally steady words. Elias knew he had to speak. The feeling inside him was too large to contain. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the stars emerge like scattered diamonds in the velvety sky, he found his courage. The only sounds were the chirping of crickets and the soft sigh of the wind. He turned to her, his profile outlined in the faint light. "Cora," he began, his voice a little rough with emotion. "When I placed that advertisement, I believed I was only looking for a partner to help with the work. I thought that was enough. I did not know anything about real companionship. I did not know what it was to have someone stand with you in a storm, both the kind that comes from the sky and the kind that comes from inside your own heart. He took a deep breath. You have shown me that. You have brought light and warmth back into this house and into my life. I did not just gain a partner. I believe I have found the woman I love. Cora listened, her eyes glistening in the starlight. His words settled into her soul, healing places that had been cold and lonely for so long. When he finished, she did not hesitate. She reached out and took his work-roughened hand in both of hers. Elias, she said, her voice clear and full of emotion. When I came here, my heart was in pieces. I was so afraid. I thought I had to hide my sadness to be worthy of this chance. But you gave me a place to heal. You saw my tears and you did not turn away. You told me I did not have to pretend. She squeezed his hand. You have shown me more kindness and understanding than anyone I have ever known. This ranch, this life we are building together, it is my home. And you are my home. I love you, Elias Blackwood. Not because I promised to in a letter, but because of the man you are. The next morning, the world seemed to sparkle with a new light. There was a shyness between them, but it was the sweet, joyful shyness of a new beginning. Over breakfast, Elias cleared his throat. A marriage that began with an advertisement should not end with one, he said, a small smile touching his lips. I think we should have a proper wedding, Cora. A real one in town, with a preacher and everything. I want to stand up in front of everyone and vow to be your husband, for real and for true. Cora's face broke into a radiant smile. I would like that more than anything, she whispered. The following Sunday, they rode into Silver Creek together, not as strangers, but as a betrothed couple. They found the small church, and the kindly preacher was delighted to marry them. A few townsfolk, the storekeeper and his wife, and the blacksmith who had showed their horses, stood as witnesses. Cora wore a simple but beautiful new dress she had secretly been sewing, and Elias wore a clean shirt, his hair slicked down with water. They held hands and looked into each other's eyes as they spoke their vows, promises of love and loyalty, not out of duty, but out of the deep and abiding affection they had cultivated together. When the preacher pronounced them man and wife, Elias leaned down and kissed Cora, a gentle and loving kiss that held the promise of their future. They were no longer Elias and Cora, the rancher and his mail-order bride. They were Elias and Cora Blackwood, husband and wife, bound together by love, respect, and the shared journey that had brought them, at last, to this moment. The return to the Lazyby Ranch after their wedding felt like the true beginning of their life. The land itself seemed to welcome them back, the golden afternoon sun painting the adobe walls of their home a warm honey color. This was no longer just Elias's ranch, or a place where Cora was staying. It was theirs. Every fence post, every rolling hill, every animal in the barn now belonged to the story they were writing together. They rode side by side up the familiar path, not speaking, simply absorbing the profound peace and rightness of the moment. The silence was filled with a perfect understanding. That evening, they sat together on the porch, just as they had so many nights before. But everything was different now. Cora rested her head on Elias's shoulder, and his arm was wrapped around her, holding her close. They watched the stars appear one by one in the vast, darkening sky. The memories of a lonely city apartment and a quiet, empty house felt like a lifetime ago, a story about two other people. They spoke softly of their hopes, not just for the next season's crop or the new foal that was due, but for the years that stretched out before them. They dreamed of filling the house with the sound of children's laughter, of growing old together in this place they both loved so deeply. Cora knew then that her healing was complete. The sorrow for her father would always be a part of her, a gentle scar on her heart. But it was no longer a raw and open wound. It had been transformed into a quiet gratitude for the love she had known and a foundation for the new love she had built. She had honored her father not by staying frozen in her grief, but by finding the courage to build a new life, a life he would have been proud of. She looked at Elias, at the strong, kind profile of the man who had given her a safe harbor, and her heart felt so full she thought it might burst. Elias felt a contentment so deep it was like nothing he had ever known. The constant, low-level loneliness that had been his companion for years was simply gone, replaced by the profound certainty that he was exactly where he was meant to be, with exactly the person he was meant to be with. He had started with a simple advertisement for help and had been given the incredible gift of a true partner, a best friend, and a love that would last a lifetime. He squeezed Cora's hand, and she looked up at him with a smile that held all the promises of their future. The sun had long since disappeared, leaving the world bathed in silvery moonlight. The ranch slept peacefully around them. They knew that tomorrow would bring its share of work and challenges, as life always did on the land. But those challenges would be faced together. They rose from their porch step and walked hand in hand into their home, closing the door softly on the night. Inside, the fire crackled warmly in the hearth, casting dancing shadows on the walls of the home they had built not from timber, stone, but from patience, kindness, and the brave, fragile decision to be honest with each other. Their story had begun with a journey and tears on a dusty platform. It would continue, for all their days, with the quiet, unshakable strength of a love that was real. The end.